Well, hello and welcome everybody. Appreciate you joining for our webinar today. I know some are still hopping on and quite a few have registered to listen after the fact. So we'll jump in for those of you that are prompted on time. We appreciate that. So my name is Ben Munson. I'm an account executive with FarmQA. I appreciate you guys spending your afternoon with me, walking through some new functionality. It's been a while since we've done webinars, so we're hoping to kind of ramp these up into the fall and do quite a few webinars, say once a month through the fall time period, and make sure everybody's comfortable with new functionality and some existing functionality that we want to make sure that you guys are aware of going into 2026. But with that being said, so today I'm going to cover our formula-based prescription writing functionality in FarmQA. So this is a brand new function that we've been working on for the last couple months, and we're very excited to present this to you all and get some feedback, get some usage, and we feel like we've got an edge in the market with what we've built, with just the customizability and the flexibility of doing formula-based prescriptions in FarmQA. But let me just kind of start and share my perspective on why we built this feature. So FarmQA has the ability to write variable rate fertility seeding prescriptions currently or previous to this feature. This has come about with a need in the industry for being able to kind of batch apply formulas or equations that may come from universities, soil labs, agronomists that want to build their own set of equations into a software platform, and then bulk apply that across a set of zones, across a set of grid points, and then have that produce nutrient maps, is what we would call it, prescription files in bulk, which you can then export out as a PDF into what we call a print map book that you can hand to a client. Or in addition to that, the shape files, which you could upload into a monitor to variable rate apply a product. So this feature is very specific and honed into variable rate, their VRT applications, and then being able to do that in a batch type of a flow or prescription. So with that being said, that's kind of me setting the stage. We've heard a lot of feedback from our customers wanting and needing a feature like this, and so that's what has come of the last couple months of our team building this particular feature. And with that, we'll kind of jump in. So what we allow you to do is you can create or set nutrient formulas. And so as I was just mentioning, that may come from your existing software and you're transitioning over. You may subscribe to a university or a lab as far as their agronomic logic behind nutrient application needs. So that is a process of how we can get those in, and we'll walk through that today. You can then use those and run the formula or equation across a set of soil data. So as part of what I'll walk through is actually start to finish, meaning starting in the field, collecting the soil samples, getting the results back into FarmQA. And then at that point, that's where the new functionality takes off of being able to run a formula across that data set. You can do this across multiple fields. So key function there is that you've got results back from a lab across a set of a dozen fields. You could then choose one equation to run across all 12 of those, and it produces VRT files. In addition to that, we also have styling profiles, so you can make the maps look the way you want them to produce the required output for your customers, for a landlord, for, let's say, an NRCS program. So with that, that's what we're going to cover. And housekeeping items before I jump in would be, we do have a team member on the FarmQA side who is monitoring the chat of teams. So please be lively in that, in asking questions real time. And then Galia on our team will jump in and ask me or prompt me for those questions in that time. So with that, looking forward to showing this to you, and look forward to the questions as well. So with that, I'm going to jump into the product, and we will jump into a live demo of the functionality. So with that being said, we are going to show, let me get my other monitor going here. All right, here we go. So you're currently looking at our web view, and some of you watching this either now or later on may be new to FarmQA. So just to set the stage on what we're looking at the moment. So this is what we call FarmQA controller. We are a cloud-based web solution, and this is the interface you'd see when accessing our software from any web browser. Then in addition to that, we're going to walk through some mobile functionality, which I will simulate here. Apologize for the simulator starting. So with this, when I show this screen, this can be run on an iPhone, Android, tablet, whatever you're needing to take to the field to do boots in the ground, sample collection, marking points with your GPS. That would run on, like I said, on your mobile app. It's something you can download from the Play Store, App Store. So just note, as I toggle between these two tabs, that's the difference. Is kind of that full screen view is going to be the representation of our website. This view is going to represent what you'd experience on a mobile device. Okay, so before we can really get into the formulas, prescriptions, I just want this to be an all-encompassing webinar. So we're going to start and go through the sampling side. I'm going to do that relatively quick because we do have other webinars that cover that in detail. So with that, if you feel like there's things that you want to dive in deeper, reach out, go to our website, and we can serve you up the correct detailed webinar on that in particular. So what we'll start with is I have a field, in this case, field 91. And where I'm going to begin is, in this case, we will start with the assumption of you have some zones that you're starting with, along with some sampling points. And in this case, we're going to use these to sample. So as you're listening to this, I'm going to try to cover a couple different scenarios. When it comes to sampling, there's composite sampling, meaning you take 10 samples in a field or an area, mix them together and send one sample to the lab. We support that as far as running formulas across that. I'm going to talk through a zone-based scenario where you've got polygons or areas like this shown on the screen that you're sampling. And then finally, we're going to talk through a grid scenario as well. So as you're listening, just keep that in mind as I flow through here. I'm going to try to cover each different scenario. And so with that, this particular field, we want to sample it. In this case, we're going to start this kind of flow, assuming that you've already got some predefined zones that you want to bring in. Again, happy to help everybody work through that process if they're not familiar with how to do that. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to create a new task. And within the new task, we had the ability to bring in the zone or associate the zone to the task. And when I say task, our vision here is that you are setting up a job, meaning that Munson Farms is somebody you're going to sample for. They want you to take zone-based samples, and so you're creating a job for yourself with all the necessary details to complete that task or that particular field. So what I've done over here is I've associated the zone to the task. We have the ability, and I'll show these other buttons here in a moment, but we have the ability to recycle through prior points. And with that, a functionality customers look for us to do would be to pull in their previous year's points. And so with that, we were recycling through, let's say, 2024 points into this particular task. And in this case, I'm going to do a select all. I'm going to choose to use all my points. But in this case, I actually have a duplicate. So I'm going to deselect that particular point. And I know that I want to collect these 6 points, a point per zone in this case. So in doing so, that I'll save that. I'll commit that and click save. Now, as part of this, we have this optional step to set things like your sample depth, your finish by date, who it's assigned to, instructions. So again, I'll move through this fairly quick because we do have a webinar covering this. But with that being said, I could say I'm going to sample 0 to 12. I want to get this done by Friday. And I have a hired hand named Benjamin. And so we're going to say collect east to west or something like that. And we'll call this webinar zone example. So with that, we create the task. And at this point, the task can be completed on the mobile app is what we designed that for. But real quick, I'm also going to mock up a grid scenario. So if we click on this field 239, I will now create a second job, new task. And up here, I'm going to set up a grid sampling scenario. So within here, a secondary button that I called out earlier but didn't utilize would be this little grid tool. The grid tool allows me to lay out a 2.5 acre grid or whatever density you want to set, say 1 acre, 5 acres, and it distributes the points at that density. And then within here, you can adjust the alignment of those points to the field. Once you're happy with that, you can hit, and you can rotate it as well. You can hit check mark to clip those points to the field. And then you can still delete, you can adjust or move points around within the boundary itself as needed. So with that, we save those points. We proceed through this process again of assigning some of the details around a work order. And let's say webinar grid test. Great. Okay, so those are some front-end setup steps to sample. We've created a zone-based job and a grid-based sampling job. At this point, I'll jump over to the mobile app. We'll show the collection of those points and then jump into running some formulas. So with this, I'll zoom in a little bit more here. We have the work tab on the bottom. And within the work tab, that's where we're going to see those items that we created. So within here, I've got the webinar grid test, and I think the zone test is still syncing through. So as we start with the grid test, I click on that particular, oh, this is the zone. So as I click on this one and hit the arrow icon, it's going to pull up the field, and in this case, it's got the associated zones plus the points. So within here, this is where we can move throughout this particular zone and collect sample points. And as part of this, if you click on a point, in this case, you'll be prompted for an ID. So that could be a barcode from a lab that you type in. And then the icon changes colors to show that you've completed that sample. In addition, your GPS would be displayed within the boundary, so you could navigate throughout the field. We show you your distance to the next point, and so you continue on and collect samples that way. So with that, that's the zone scenario, just showing that the task itself pulls through the zones plus the points, and you can collect the samples in the field. Complete the task or the job when done. And then in this case, we also have the grid scenario. I'll show real quick. And so this is very similar, just with we don't have the zones to display, just a series of points evenly spaced. And so you can set up your IDs, and then we'll auto advance through your points throughout this field as you progress. So with that, that is the mobile side, or I should say the setup side, the mobile collection, the submittal of those samples. At this point, we can get the results back in. So either that's through one of our integration partners, or through uploading a CSV file. And so with this, again, I won't spend too much time, but in our system, you can click the upload sample button. Within this, you can use a profile for whatever lab you currently work with. And then at this point, you can select and associate which folder or client you're uploading data to, which season you're uploading data to, and then a collection date. At which point you can drop a CSV file in, and that would correspond back to the fields, the sample points, and results would be in FarmQA at that point. All right, at this point in time, we'll kind of step through new functionality. So everything I showed for the most part is existing, but I wanted this to be, like I said, a comprehensive webinar of getting people kind of start to finish through the process of writing a VRT file through a formula. So for this demo, I've got a handful of fields. So I have this grid formula 1 field, and in this you can see I've uploaded the results. So I have a series of points throughout the field. I've got columns that represent phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, all the results that we've received back from a lab. And you can see I've got 3 fields in that scenario, each having points and results. Same thing for zones. One addition to existing FarmQA customers is we now truly associate the results to the zone. And so with this, you can see in my table grid, I now see my association of this result back to a zone and a zone ID. And so that allows us to run an equation across the zones opposed to it being purely point-based. And so in this case, you can see zone 1 has the associated phosphorus, potassium, sulfur results. Okay, so in this moment, I've got 3 fields that are set up to be more of a grid scenario, 3 fields that are a zone scenario. With that, we'll now talk through setting up formulas, at which point I'll run against both the zone and the grid fields and show you the output of that process. All right, so the concept of a formula, I've mentioned that a couple times, so we'll explain what that means to us. So in this case, if we create a new formula, we allow you to specify what the formula is. And to help with this webinar, I had a scenario this morning with a customer that has working with the University of Arkansas, and they have a potassium formula. And so the University of Arkansas agronomically believes in applying, in this case, you need 140 pounds per acre of potassium to be applied if your potassium results from the lab fall within the range of 0 to 61. Additionally, if it falls in the range of 61 to 90, apply 95 pounds, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the style of formula that we would then be able to build into FarmQA. I would say if this process intimidates you, concerns you, this is part of what we can help you with, is making sure that we get your formulas built in, and that can be through a sit down on a Teams call, talk through your agronomic preferences, or simply point us to a source that you want to utilize. But in this case, we'll use this scenario to create an example formula. So in this case, I'll create a, let's say, webinar K example equation. Description, you can do something like the University of Arkansas KREC. Output types. So as part of this, we allow you to create nutrient would probably be the most common. So nutrient rate would mean the formula, the output of the equation, if you will, is going to tell you as a user how many pounds per acre of nutrient to apply in an area. So in my equation, where I was just referring to the potassium ranges being 0 to 61, outputs the 140 as a result. 140 is saying that's how many pounds per acre of potassium to apply in that particular area to grow crop X, Y, or Z. And typically the equations are crop specific, so you create an equation per crop, for example. Product rate, so we do support that. That would be the concept of, say, bypassing the kind of a nutrient rate, meaning you say my formula directly produces how many pounds of urea to apply, or directly produces how many pounds of MAP to apply to my fields. So that would be the scenario of a product rate. Seeding rate is a bit more straightforward. So that's saying my formula produces a numeric value saying in this particular area to apply 20,000 seeds per acre of corn. Unspecified keeps things open-ended. We realize we might run into scenarios of customers wanting to use this outside of the scope of what we may have imagined. So there's kind of an other category, if you will. I would say nutrient rate is going to be probably the most common use case. And so we'll select that in this scenario. So the particular nutrient we're dealing with, potassium, we allow you to define 2 different types of variables, numeric variables and soil nutrient variables. I would say in majority of cases, your formula may only have a soil nutrient variable in the case of my potassium equation. So we'll start with that. I'll add a variable and call it K, associate it to potassium, and it pulls through parts per million, which is what we'll be dealing with at the moment. And now we can define our formula. It's expression based and how we want that written in FarmQA. Again, this is where if you're coming from Excel, if you're coming from a current software provider, oftentimes we can copy paste in the formula or expression in here, or the FarmQA support team, we can help you kind of build these from scratch or choose from a catalog. So with this, if we look at the example over here on the right, the K values from 0 to 61. So we can start to write this as kind of if-then statements. So if K is less than, say, 61, then apply, it says here, 140. So we'll say 140. Make a new line. If K is less than 90, then we're going to apply 95 pounds. So on and so forth through this formula. If I create 2 more sections here, we'll say this is 130, maps back to 60 pounds. And then in this case, 175 maps back to 40. And then I'll end this with if K is greater than 175, then apply nothing. Close that out with a series of brackets to complete the equation. And let's see. So in that case, that would be let's see, completion of the expression there. So yeah, with that, that's kind of the flow of what you can go through here of creating expression. We will tell you if it's valid or invalid. This particular one isn't at the moment. I won't spend too much time diagnosing that. But with that, so here's, I kind of wrote this up in a prior scenario as well. So this equation we can save off. Actually, in this case, I can't. It's not valid. But with that, I've kind of pre-created a series of other equations. So a potassium rec from a tri-state formula. I'm going to use this P recommendation as well. And so with that, those are the types of equations you can use. You can also do what we consider kind of this multi-variable. So in this case, this North Dakota lime formula uses the combination of CEC results and pH. And then you can see throughout the expression, we use both those variables within the equation itself. So with that, that's kind of a typical setup for what you might expect to see in a formula or an equation. And at this point, we can then use this to batch apply across the set of fields that I have created. So with this, happy to come back to this screen at any point in time, but just this is you being the driver's seat. I also want to call that out, that what I just did as far as define that University of Arkansas K formula, you can set that up yourself. You don't have to call support up. You don't have to do anything. You can do that on your own. This interface is available to customers.
Hey Ben,
the one thing I failed to mention,
we do have our first question. It's been out there for a little bit, but it's around being able to draw their own zones. So if they're not doing a complex zone and they don't want to upload it, can they draw their own zones?
They can, yep. So I'll do a quick kind of walkthrough of that. So I'm going to create a new field as part of this. And so we'll call this webinar custom zone field. So in this, we have the ability to, we talked about, I kind of mentioned in passing, upload your zones, but the question at hand is saying, I want to more or less freehand draw my zones. So as part of this, I go and click the add button and select management zones. And as part of this, I can create blank zones. And so what we'll do in this moment is we'll create a blank zone. We'll say, I know that I want 3 zones in total. Let's say I want to color code these red to green. And then you can use this split tool and then the shapes to start freehand drawing out some areas. So for example, I'm going to take a pass and kind of create a zone up here. And I'm going to do the same thing and create a zone that kind of bisects here and comes over here. Okay, so I created those splits. So what this is doing is I call it it's a cookie cutter. So you've got the dough is laid out and you just cut different sections out of the dough. But we now need to paint those into their associated zones. So I can now change zones and say this is a zone 2 and this is a zone 3. And I can show labels and say this is a webinar custom zones. and save those. So at this point, yeah, in a matter of say a minute or two, we created the field and we created some custom zones. And then at this point, we're now caught up to speed with saying you could sample based on that, upload results based on it, run formulas based on that. So hopefully that addressed that question. And we do have support docs. Obviously, that was quick as well, but we can send you support links. It's through that add management zone. And then within that interface, we have the create blank zones is how you do that. Great question, though. Anything else, Gailey, at the moment?
Nope, that's all there is so far.
Okay. The other thing I was going to mention before I left the formula description, we talked about the soil nutrient variables being very common in these types of expressions, but you can also add numeric variables. And that might be something I'd say the more common scenario that we built this for would be things like a yield goal, or let's just call it, yeah, we'll call it yield goal. And so as part of this, YG. So as part of this, you can set that to be a fixed variable and say, oh, this is my potassium rec for high yielding corn. And as part of that, high yielding I define as being 200 bushels per acre. Or what we can do is we can prompt for this value when you use that equation. So with that, if this is turned on, in the moment when you try to run this equation across a field, we're going to pop up a dialog and say, what is your yield goal for this field? At which point you put a value in. So it's either typing in a value here and we just use that hard coded, or you could then have it be prompted as part of your the run process. And then we can start to use this variable in the equation and say, take this whole thing times my yield goal, for example. And so as soon as you define it as a variable, you can use it in the expression with whatever terminology you use here for C, C, K, Y, G in this case. Okay, so with that, we've got the formulas created. We are now going to get to the more interesting part of using those, running those in a batch. So as I mentioned, let's just start with the zone scenario. With this, actually, sorry, one more thing I want to call out. We do have styling profiles. So as I run these formulas, what it's going to do is start to generate layers. It's going to generate a layer for your phosphorus result from the lab in a color-coded format. It's going to create a urea prescription map. But with that, you can define the styling of each of those layers if you want. We have some default profiles set up, so every nutrient will style, regardless of if you do this or not. But if you want to override, you could do that. So when I say override, we could do something like creating a pH style profile, and we'll associate this to pH in this case. And we have a couple options. So you can choose to show labels, yes or no. You can choose the associated color ramp for pH. So let's say we want that to be kind of this red spectrum of a very light or white color to a dark red. And then you can leave it at that. You could say this is a profile and you're done. What this would do is it would be what we'd call dynamic, meaning if you ran this formula using this styling profile, field A had a pH range of 7 to 8. 7 would be that very light white color, and 8 would be that very dark red color. On the next field, field B, it has a range of 6 to 7. On that field, that white color is going to be 6, and the dark red is going to be 7. And so that's what I mean by dynamic, meaning that we run that full color spectrum across the min and max value of each field. If you want that to be more fixed or defined, you can start to add coloring, this color ramp. And that's you saying, I want to create, let's say 6 or 7 different buckets. And still talking pH, we could say, I want this to be 5 to 5.5, 5.5 to 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8. So with this, now back to my scenario of field A and field B. In that case of field A, where I mentioned it was from a range of 7 to 8, that whole field will style as this very dark red and maroon type colors, whereas field B will style in this medium kind of pinkish to a red color, where I said it ran 6 to 7. So it becomes, I got a drink here. So instead of it being dynamic, it runs across your defined ranges of coloring, so that when you look at and say, when I look at and see a dark maroon color in FarmQA, I inherently know that's 7.5 to 8 as far as a range for pH. So with that, just calling out that there's styling profiles. And then you can also create profiles for things like, let's create a map profile, or urea or DAP. And so with this, we'll associate this to map itself. And then within here, I want map to style in a series of blue colors. And in this case, we'll leave that as far as I want it to be dynamic and run it from a light blue to dark blue. So with that ability to profile style this, and so ultimately what this is doing for you is creating color-coded maps that are meaningful to you and you understand what you're looking at visually. And then in addition, making that to a PDF that you can then send off and have it be an engaging conversation around the maps, given that they're color-coded, and extracting out, say, high and low values visually through the colors. Okay, so now back to running this formula. So I'll go to my zone fields. And so with this, I had the 3 fields that I had zones on. I had results to the zones, and I could now multi-select the fields. So with this, I can now run my formulas, but I'm going to do that in a batch. So this is what I meant when I referred to that earlier of a batch being multiple fields. So in this case, I've got 3 fields selected. It says no formulas are currently chosen. So I will add formulas to this batch process, and I'll say run the potassium rec and the phosphorus rec is what I want to showcase now. So choosing those formulas, we now do validation, and if, let's say, a field did not have potassium results in a particular zone, we would throw up a little red box here saying cannot proceed, this field doesn't have results, at which point you could remove that formula to make it valid. You could go back and double check your data. You could remove the field and continue with the other fields. So we do have kind of checks and balances on this screen to make sure that as you proceed, it's with valid data. The additional step that you can take here, and an optional step, is the equation that I have set up for P and K is the nutrient rate equation, where it's going to output the result of saying how many pounds per acre of K do you need in each zone in this particular case. You can then optionally associate a product to say which K product are you going to apply to appease the needs of the K rec. So I'm going to say potash. So with that, we'll now get a nutrient map saying what did the lab tell you was in the soil. You'll get a layer that represents the formula output of how many pounds per acre of K you need to apply. And then a third and final prescription that outputs how much potash to apply to satisfy that equation or the needs of the equation. Same thing for P. So now we're going to also output let's say a map recommendation. So you notice that underneath this, we also have some options to set as multipliers, min-max rates. So I would describe this as your agronomic paintbrush. So you can say formula spits out a value, but I want to say whatever it spits out, we're going to go 90% of that. So fertilizer is expensive. We're just going to back it down to this field. That's our preference. Additionally, you can set min rates, max rates on this particular map, the map product. As we make these adjustments, as I click these other fields, you notice that there's still none of those settings are set in these other fields. So what I can do is I can now apply this to all fields. So I'm going to do that. And now as I click these other fields, you can see that they now have all those same formulas run, all the same products set, all the same min and max value set. So with this, you can now tweak at a field level to say, well, for this field 2, I'm not going to apply phosphorus. So I'm going to clear that out. But I still want potassium, and I want to increase the rate of potassium. We're going to 1.1 on this field. So the point to be made there is that this is a process, it's a batch, but you can make field level tweaks as part of this process. And so that as the output of this, Yes, you click the run button once, but this Formula 2 field is only going to have one rec on it. So yeah, you can make field level tweaks. So key function there. Actually, I do want map on this field here. So go back to the prec and add map. All right, and then on this one, let's just say remove p. Okay, so at this point, we have satisfied the kind of the validation here. We see no errors, so we can run and process this. And when I say validation, again, it's we have the necessary variables in all the zones in this case, so I can hit run. What we're doing in this moment is it ran all 5 formulas, so 2 on the first 2 fields and only 1 on that third field. And so now as if I click in and view the output or the final product of what I just did. This all lives within layers. So over here, if I expand out layers, you can see I've got my management zones, and that's going to be that spatial file that I created. I've got my prescriptions, which we'll get to, and then the soil results. And so as part of this, if I click into the results, you can see, as I was referring to, each nutrient that I have in that zone got a layer. And that layer was styled based on the profile or default. And so if we look at phosphorus here, if I click on this red zone, it's telling me that the lab result I got back to that zone was 9 parts per million. The equation I ran, the tri-state equation, told me that in that zone, we now need to apply 119 pounds per acre of phosphorus to get to a level of producing based on your yield goals, based on your agronomic understanding of the needs. Finally, we also produced this MAP prescription, which said to apply 206 pounds per acre of MAP in this field to appease the needs of that phosphorus equation, which was 119 pounds an acre. So with that all happened automatically through that batch process, through the equation. And so with that, you can see how you can kind of look through your different layers, style in different ways, and see how that would look. In this case, pH, we had that profile set that ran the data. So if I click into this, you can see all my pH ranges or values fell all kind of within this 6 and 7 range. And those buckets I set up, it doesn't really use the whole spectrum because it all fell within kind of a relatively similar range. So that's what happens if you set up those custom buckets, is you get a view more like this opposed to being dynamic on something maybe more like sulfur. And I can drill in, so that little arrow icon, let's go to maybe map again. And I can drill in. In this case, I use that blue profile for map, as you can see here. And I can drill in, I can see the data or the application rates of map per zone, the total acreage that occupies. And so within here, a couple things to mention is that I can export this out as a map book, is what we would call it. And so I can select all the layers and I can produce that into a PDF. You could deselect layers. So let's say I just want a nutrient book or a PDF. And so I've deselected my prescriptions and I click on this export button. I now have the option to export this to PDF or export those as shape files. So if you want to take them elsewhere, that's more applicable when we're talking about prescriptions, but the button does exist for other layers if you want that. So when I export to PDF, this will generate a page per nutrient in this case. And again, I've chosen to include the prescriptions in there as well. But that's just optionally if I want to provide this to a government program, and that's the requirement on a map for the nutrients, versus the client side, they might want more of the prescription files in here as well. So what this looks like, so we've got your logo that you'd upload. This is your phosphorus map for your client, Minnesota Farms, and the field name is Zone Formula 1. With this, you can see the map. You can see we summarize this of the acreage, the minimum value of phosphorus on this field, the maximum value, and then the average, and then break that down by zone, showing you the results per zone, and again, that average down here. On to page 2 would be potassium map with the same data, sulfur, organic matter, etc. So it's the output of your data, being able to deliver that to your clients in a PDF format if that is a need that you have. Additionally, I mentioned coming back to prescriptions. So prescriptions we treat uniquely. And so with this, you can see that we kind of cleave out and have your prescriptions here. You can export one at a time to shapefile if you'd like. But a key function here as well is if you ran that across 3 different fields, which I did, I now have all my prescriptions. So that zone formula 3, I ran 2 prescriptions here and 2 prescriptions here. So the output of that I did all through one click of a button, and now I can deliver this to the customer in one clean export as well. So I multi-selected all 5 of those prescriptions. I click the export button, and now I can export that to shapefile and PDF as well. So the shapefile, this is going to be the machine readable format. So you could upload this into the monitor of an application device. And then within here, you can see we've got all the necessary components for that output. And then in addition to this, we have the PDF as well. So this PDF is representing specifically the output of, this is your potash rates per zone, potash totals in tons. And then this is field number 2, same thing, field number 2, but with a different product, etc. So that is from the grower side, or if you need to send this to an applicator, those 2 things in conjunction, the shapefile plus this, provides the custom applicator, the retail, the co-op, the information they need to go enact and complete these applications on your behalf. So with that, just wanted to call out the batch export as well of specifically the prescriptions in here. So with that's kind of a complete flow on zones, and happy to take questions. But what I'm going to do next, go ahead.
So there is a question about formulas. Do they apply to all clients or a specific, it says specific for each farm, but I'm assuming specific for clients?
Sure. So within here, in this case, let's just say the University of Arkansas. So we had this is what they publish on their website and say, this is what we, based on all of our research we've done in Arkansas, what we believe is the best recommendation. But with that, you might, or your client might have different preferences on how they operate. So there's a couple things you can do to make it client specific. One is on this formula, we'll call this University of Arkansas potassium formula, and we'll say Munson Farms. So let's say I don't like to spend money, so I'm going to reduce my rates here and say I'm going to use that same formula, but I'm just going to dial this back by 10 parts per million on all, or sorry, 10 pounds per acre on all my rates. So now what we have is we've got a unique formula for Munson Farms, and I'll save that. Then I'll duplicate this out and say same thing, but for Johnson Farms. And Johnson Farms, he's progressive. He's trying to push yield, so he's going to increase these values here. So I just increased my application rates for Johnson Farms and decreased them for Munson Farms. So that's one way to go about that if you want to have these client-specific scenarios. The other thing I would call out is back to our formula run process. Same thing here is if all you're doing is slightly adjusting the rates, yes, you could create new formulas, and I could say, give me my Munson formula versus Johnson formula here. So you could do that and run that independently now, or you could adjust this through the multiplier. So with that, you could make adjustments client specific by just putting they want a half rate, or they want to go 1.5 rate across their fields. So those are kind of 2 different ways you can handle that client specific comment. And so yes, you can define it at the formula level, or you could define it within here if it's as simple as increasing or decreasing the entire rate by a percentage.
Awesome. Another question, is it possible to do multiple nutrients in the formula to come up with a complete blend for a zone or a field?
I might need clarification on that, because for me, that was the P and the K rec here. I'm running multi-nutrient. And so I don't know if there's further clarification on that. I mean, this would be multi-nutrient in my mind. Or are they saying they want to run a blend, like they know they're going to use a particular blend and then go through the formula process?
I read the question, so maybe Darcy can add some more clarification on that
Okay.
one, and we can come back to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, that'd be great to do that. I'll go ahead and get
Okay, and then on the PDF report, is there a summary page that lists all of the nutrients needed in one quick look? And then also, is there a way to export to Excel?
Good question. So right now, there's no product total. That's something that we've heard as we've shown this to people. So that is on our to-do list, is similar to how if you're an existing FarmQA customer, we have combined product totals on our recommendations. And so with that, we can now show potash, you need 150 tons, and urea, 198 tons. So with that, I would envision us adding in the future a either cover page or the tailing page that would be something like this. And so then as a retailer, they would know before they leave the retail location to load up 150 tons of potash and go out to the fields. So the short answer today is no, future, that's on the to-do list. And then there's a question about Excel. We do not support Excel exports of this data. I guess I would be curious to know more about what you'd want in an Excel. So if whoever asked that, if you kind of elaborate, is it just product totals? Is it the kind of these tables, but consolidated across fields? So if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat as well.
And Darcy did respond on the multiple formulas and or multiple nutrients in the formulas. Yeah. That answered her question.
Okay, thanks, Darcy. Appreciate it. So yeah, with that, I want to talk to the grid scenario real quick, and so that we do have questions at the end, so we've allotted a fair amount of time for that. So keep the questions coming. This process is very similar. So I've got 3 fields in this case that have grid-based data, and going back real quick to the data itself. So in this case, no zone. So a series of points with results, and we're going to run an equation across that. And again, we'll do it in a batch. So I've got the 3 grid fields that I've multi-selected, and I'm going to run formulas. I'm going to run the same thing. I'm going to take the KREC and the PRECs again, just to keep things consistent. A couple things to note. I want to call this out in the grid scenarios. It's prompting you as a user to tell us which data you want to run the maps against. So with that, our kind of the top level filter of this would be growing season. So it's saying I want to run the soil data from 2025 or the soil data from 2024. And so a scenario here is you might only collect grid samples every 3 years, every 4 years, but you want to generate new prescriptions every year. So you can reach back into a prior year's data and write a new set of prescriptions. Additionally, you have these optional dates. So I would describe this as you've got this high-level season filter, and then this optional, more restrictive filter of saying, I sampled in the spring and fall. Maybe you only want to use your fall results. So you put this window in here of August 1 to December 1, and that encompasses that tighter filter of that fall data opposed to the spring. All right. So now within here, so we've selected the data set we're going to run it against, my 25 results. I selected 2 formulas. In this case, we're going to do this again. We're going to use potash, and we're going to use phosphorus. Let's see, missing. Oh yeah, not phosphorus. I meant to say potash. So in here, or no, map. Map's what I did before. So map, multipliers, min-max rates. That's got similar here. We're going to apply this to all fields. So we've got 3 fields that are all running both those formulas, running against those sets of products, and we can now hit go. So with this, we tried to make this look and feel very similar on both scenarios of grids versus zones. In this case, on the grids, we're going to hit go. This is going to take a while, so we're going to generate, and this one will actually take a little bit longer. So we're doing spatial interpolation, if you will, across those points. Whereas in the zone scenario is the zones, the polygons, if you will, those shapes are defined or fixed, and we're simply styling it or giving it color based on the value. Whereas in the grid scenario, we have 60 points in the field, and we're generating these smooth lines to create these like-minded or similarly grouped buckets of data. And so with that, that's a heavier lift as far as processing goes. So with that, that's cranking away on 3 fields. I think I've got, say, 6 to 10 nutrients on each. And then in addition, it's those as applied maps and prescriptions coming out as well. So with that here, once those run, I'll jump over the field and show you the breakdown. But you can also generate the print map books the same on grids. So it's really a very similar look and feel, with the exception of on the front end, the collection side of laying out the 2.5 acre grids or whatever the density is. And then on the back end, just selecting what data set to run it across. All right. So we'll grab the Formula One field for all of our race car fans. And within here, we've got a couple things. We've got the points we can display. So in the case of the zones, our very top level root folder, if you will, was those spatial polygons or areas. With this case, it's just a layout of points. And then within here, we can start to view the phosphorus interpolation, the potassium maps, sulfur, etc. So with that, it does all we call it interpolation, clustering, whatever you want to call that. It follows the styling profiles just the same. And then it also produces, so in this case, we'll go back to phosphorus. So it's saying in this area, we need the lab on average said 11 parts per million. Phosphorus results, we need to apply 131 pounds per acre, and then map 253 pounds per acre in that area. So it produces that set of maps. And then similarly, we can now export this out, shapefiles, PDFs, generate those print map books. And in this case, let's just show a scenario here where you could go with just the product and the prescriptions in the PDF, just to show some flexibility in what gets outputted from this scenario. And then with this too, I'll also show how these, circling back to the prescriptions page, of how these all funnel back into that same bulk export of prescriptions. So with that, again, keep the questions coming to the chat, because we're coming up to question time, and we'll gladly walk through that. So here is my output PDF from that. So I've got my phosphorus map, similar data, min-max values, averages, phosphorus results per kind of bucketed area. Map, this is the actual prescription in this case of map, using that blue color palette. Potassium, and then the potash, in this case, output. And then with that, the prescriptions funnel up just the same as zones did. So now you can see I've got the grid prescriptions in here. So I could then grab all those as well and export that to shapefile. Okay, with that, appreciate everybody's time this afternoon, and we'll be in touch. Take care.